Hello, everybody. Welcome to Bart's X. I'm very excited to be part of this sixth cohort of Bart's X. So Happy New Year. I'm Maxine Birmingham, and let's get into it. So today I'm going to talk to you about how to identify fantastic problems to solve, how to know that they are the right ones to solve, and how to design a proposition that you can then sell on to people who need that problem to be solved. Just a little background on me. I spent most of my career leading commercial strategy and innovation for global telcos, including Orange and Vodafone. I then left in 2016 to start my own consultancy called Thinking Around Corners. That took me to Giant because I was working particularly in health tech, where I met Shafi. I joined the very first Bart's X medicine team, and I've been involved ever since. And here are a couple of the cohort teams with their solutions. I also work for a couple of other companies, particularly around now sustainable healthcare, and I've been trying to support different organizations with dealing and managing with COVID infection. So here we are. You're going to learn about how innovation and change relate. It's important because there is a process that you need to manage even after you've come up with your fantastic idea in real life. How to find that problem that's really worth solving, how to understand whether it has scale or not, and what the impact of solving it might be, and then how to design those kinds of solutions that people will value and will actually meet the needs that your problem is aiming to solve. So let's talk about how innovation and change relate. So you'll find that they're actually sides of the same challenge. And if you want to be able to achieve impact, often your innovation has to be perceived to be delivering something around 10 times the benefit of the existing solution in order to be able to stimulate that change, because that innovation may affect the lives and careers of many, many other people. And that is going to need a degree of leadership, which I know as med students and aspiring doctors, you'll know that leadership is so much a part of what you're doing as part of your core job. But if you want to innovate, you have to use that leadership to influence the whole system, so as the change that your innovation brings can be accommodated. So innovation, as I said, overcomes a problem. So you have a perceived existing current state, and you have a desired state where you want to go. So innovation overcomes that gap between the existing and the desired state, and change is actually the consequence of it. So it's what has to happen in order to absorb and implement an innovation. Now, innovation also happens in different gears. You can have incremental innovation, things that are just a little less expensive or a little better performing. Then you also get new technologies that are breakthrough, that might be using the existing business model and the way of doing things. But, for example, some of the new ways in which vaccines have been developed and other clinical pathways may be, a breakthrough, but not necessarily radical. Radical innovation is actually usually very disruptive to incumbent players. Think about things like Airbnb and Uber that have completely revolutionized the driving and the accommodation market. Now, of course, as a corollary, radical change is really scary. So if you have an amazing innovation that completely reinvents how something is done, that changes the business model, you can be prepared to have to work pretty hard to get people to have a go. Now, also, innovation can be applied in different parts of the system. We often think of innovation as being a product, what's a product that is better, be it a piece of software or something that is tangible and physical. But you can also innovate beyond the product. It might be about the process in which something is made is actually the innovation, or it might be the channel in which it's delivered. More often, a successful new product offering will also have a number of innovations that make the customer experience far better than the original. So do have a think when you're thinking about the problem. You might not always be solved with a product. It actually may be solved with a process. So one of those things could be, for example, the surgical backlog. Actually, you're not going to change how surgery is done. You're not going to change necessarily the equipment that's used, but you may change the process by which resource that is doing surgery can match the need of people needing surgery. So do open your minds a little more broadly from just thinking about a product. Now, innovation has a cost because the change that innovation causes is likely to have an impact on individuals. It may be that you've got to redesign a clinical pathway. BART-X itself was an innovation, and the cost was, I'm sure Shafi will tell you, it wasn't trivial to actually be able to incorporate innovation into a medical curriculum. So do think a little bit about the person on the end, or people actually on the end of that of your innovation, and how are you going to make it acceptable to them. Another little book that I would recommend for people wanting to understand change, and it's also a great way of understanding why you should innovate, is Our Iceberg is Melting. It is a book by, and I think it's probably 20 years old or more now, but it is a definitive business book. So do have a look out for that. And John Cotter explains how you have to essentially enable people to accept change. Okay, now we can go on to how do we find a problem that's worth solving. I'm sure you've had problems yourself and you've thought about how to solve them, but how many people have had the same problem? So you need to be thinking about the depth of a problem and the impact it has on solving it, and also the range of that. How many people are going to have that problem? And it's that size of problem and the impact versus now is what helps to define whether your problem will have value when you solve it. Now, valuable problems have got different characteristics. One of the ones I like to use is the 4U model from Harvard. So you can think about things that are unworkable in the medical system. For example, inpatient communication. So when people are in the ward waiting surgery, it's very difficult to manage what's the communication back out to the loved ones. What's unavoidable? Well, for example, transporting casualties to a facility for surgery. Underserved, well, women's health has been historically very much underserved, but now more and more resources in the system are beginning to impact that. And lastly, what's urgent? Urgent is always a great thing to have if you have an innovation, because if people need to solve it right now, you'll be listened to. So the pandemic obviously stimulated quite a lot of innovations, and many of them cut through because people really felt they had to do something. Another framework we're thinking about is whether the need is blatant, latent, aspirational, or critical. People need spectacles blatantly, but do they need to be Tom Fords? We have always needed to communicate long distance, and we've been innovating that for millennia. We aspire for premium water. We absolutely never needed it. We managed many, many years, millennia again without it. And energy is a critical need. And actually, the need for clean energy is becoming actually blatant now rather than latent. Also, think beyond in intervention. It's very easy and obvious as a medical student to think about how you can cure and fix people, but actually also think about existing interventions. how can you reduce the risks of them, reduce the cost of them, increase the availability of resources, reduce the waste coming out of that, reutilize capacity, particularly staff and operating theatres. How can you eliminate friction, and how can you improve mediation to match need to supply? Of course, there is no shortage of problems within healthcare. Here are some examples just from 2020 as the virus took hold, but you could take any period in time and there are plenty of news headlines on what's going wrong with the healthcare system. And there certainly is, of course, a constant cost challenge and the need to improve outcomes. Innovation around COVID was, certainly brought some great things out of the network. There were new 3D printed ventilator valves and PPE, symptom trackers. Shafi himself innovated around pulling the world together as it experienced COVID, bringing medical professionals together and trying to share that knowledge. There've been virtual hacks, accelerators. AI has improved our vaccine and clinical drug discovery. There's been the test and trace type of apps. And then, of course, telemedicine. I think we spoke about it in the industry as having around 4 years progress made in the same number of weeks. But there's another crisis that is around us, which is the climate crisis, and innovation is needed there as well, particularly within healthcare. So I don't know if you're aware of the US Sustainable Development Goals. Clearly, number 3 is good health and well-being. But one of the things that COVID has really thrown up is the amount of healthcare inequalities there are. So that's goal number 10. And then with the proliferation of waste, the usage of water, and of course the effect of climate change itself, these other goals are also crucial to think about when you're designing health. And I will expect that in the next few years, we're going to be evaluated as we innovate within healthcare, not only on the change in outcomes and the positive impact on health economics. We will also be asked to ensure that we don't have a greater carbon footprint, for example, in a solution that we come up with. Because the health sector and climate change are actually starkly linked. If the health sector were actually a country, it would be the 5th largest greenhouse gas emitter on the planet. And we're pumping up out about 4 times the combined weight of all humans alive every year in healthcare. Of course, the developed markets are taking the lion's share of that. But if you think about health inequities and getting healthcare to the other half of the world's total, the other half of the world's population, you can see how much that's going to rise. And of course, it's not just what happens within the healthcare industry itself, but there's a huge impact from the carbon intensive supply chain in actually delivering healthcare. This is quite alarming, given the fact that the medical professions are meant to do no harm, but climate change itself is a leading contributor to disease, to human displacement, and it deeply disrupts the well-being and health of humans right across the planet. This is something the NHS itself is taking very, very seriously. It established a Sustainable Development Unit and has published a carbon reduction strategy. I would urge you to have a look at that. And actually, the average patient is responsible for or contributes at least its own weight in carbon emissions during its care. So this may be through travel, through direct energy consumption within facilities or procurement. And pharmaceuticals themselves are about 1/5 of the carbon footprint of the NHS. So that's just to give you a flavor. If you're interested in innovating around this, then do dig in a little bit more deeply. There's also a very good breakdown there if you're looking specifically at where to innovate in terms of where the biggest impacts are. Sustainable surgery, you can think about preventing surgery is actually the #1 thing you can do to use all of the capacity a bit more efficiently, to go to local anesthetic rather than general, to manage particularly anesthetic gases, to recycle and reuse consumables, to avoid setting up all of the instruments that have to be sterilized between uses. So if you didn't have to lay them all out, could you conserve energy in that way? So these are some ideas for opportunity areas to explore in sustainable surgery. Again, a bit of reading material. All of these are live links. So when you get a copy of my presentation, you can link through to all of these resources. So that's it on terms of a problem that you can solve. Once you've identified your problem, you'll want to design a solution that people will value. And there's some tips and tricks on how to do that. Firstly, you need to think about your target audiences. The complexity of the healthcare system is such that often the people who really benefit from your solution are not necessarily the ones who are responsible for the budget. So you need to try and draw a web together for who is impacted most by your innovation, who benefits from it, who would be buying it, who would be distributing it, who has to be trained on it. So have a think about that. And again, you might find that there are existing solutions that are broken maybe in only 1 or 2 areas. So your innovation can focus on solving that to make a better overall system. So again, think wider than innovation, think wider than just the patient or the people buying or the doctor. So it's more complex than that. So do have a look, particularly in anything that is preventative. It always sounds like the best idea is to prevent healthcare problems before they happen, but they're actually one of the most challenging to find budget for. Now, one of the things that you'll be asked when you think about your innovation is, what is it competing with? Is there already another innovation out there that's doing it? Or are people working around existing difficult situations? The pager might be one of those. The pager system has not been ideal, but people somehow manage to work with it. That's often quite true of lots of different tech innovations within the healthcare world. Sometimes you end up dealing with a hot air balloon rather than a plane. The analogy is that there are things that get you off the ground, but they don't really get you anywhere. So you might find there's an innovation that's sort of better than what's around, but actually it stops short of really having lasting progressive impact. Another thing to think about is focus. It's tempting to look at the entire value chain of delivery and try to innovate right the way along it. What you might, or actually trying to meet the needs of far too many people. The recommendation is to remove all of the barriers to usage for one strong need, rather than trying to remove one barrier that applies to lots of needs. So to focus on really answering one problem and doing it superlatively well will be much more acceptable and more beneficial than the other way around. So don't be afraid to start small and do that really well, because then eventually what can happen is the solution that you have can be reapplied over and over again. And it's easier to do it once you have understood the wider delivery of the whole solution. Another way of breaking down a problem and trying to understand how to solve it is something called design thinking. And it's a 5-step process that allows you to really get under the skin of the person you're serving. You create a kind of customer persona or patient persona, and you really understand them, what their needs are, their frustrations, their barriers. And then you try to understand their pain points and ideate around solutions that meet those pain points. You can then prototype it, and then you can go back through the process, check with them, did it work? And you build and iterate between prototype, test, emphasize, define, ideate, and background again. Or you might do prototype, test, ideate, and round and round and round again. You're very, very unlikely to solve a problem just straight linearly, perfectly from one end to the other. It takes a lot of testing to really get under the skin. So think about how you might pilot your whatever solution you have. How would you get feedback in a kind of closed group? And then how would you get it to a point where you could bring it to the world commercially? How do you get something that's known as a minimum viable product, something that actually can be marketed, even if it doesn't have every bell and whistle you want it to do? Will it have enough for you to learn how well it's working and to iterate after that? Again, plenty of links to follow. Now, one of the things we talk about is the value proposition, and that's what it says. It creates value for customers. Again, a great resource is a website called strategizer.com, strategizer with a Y. And you'll find there the business model canvas and a value proposition canvas. If you go through the animations on this, you'll learn how to ask yourself the questions. And when you can fill in, firstly, the value proposition and then everything else around it, by asking these questions, you'll end up designing a good, cohesive proposition. So proposition is very simple. It is what you do uniquely well for whom. So who has the problem? What is your solution to that problem? And what is it about the way that you're solving that problem is unique? So this very, very simple phrase, you should think about expressing your idea in these very, very simple terms. The other aspect of innovation is purpose. And another book, of course, I recommend. I do not own a bookshop. I'm not going to benefit from this. But another great book for innovators is called Start With Why by Simon Sinek. And he really talks about start with why. Why are you doing it? What's your purpose? And as doctors and aspiring doctors, this is something that I think will already drive you. And then how does that, your process, take you to realize your purpose, and how do you prove that? What's your product, the proof of that purpose that you have? And just really almost in conclusion, this is another more expanded version of a proposition template, which will again help you express what you're trying to achieve. So it's for these people or companies who are dissatisfied with whatever is the current way of doing it. The solution that you've come up with does it this way, which enables people to do this and achieve that, unlike the alternatives, yeah? So if you can think about what you're doing versus the current way of doing things and its drawbacks, again, it will help you express what you're trying to achieve before you start developing PowerPoints and prototypes or any other way of illustrating what you want to do. So there is change ahead. I hope that you're going to make us change through the amazing innovations that you come up with over the next few weeks. So just to revisit what I've been talking about, health systems are complex and slow to change. You'll need your leadership skills to make your innovation compelling. There are lots of models to help you spot the opportunities and problems. Don't let experience cloud you from seeing them. You have a real gift at the moment before you're sucked into the system. Flag it. If you see something that doesn't work, think about how you want it to work. And then the value proposition and the strategizer.com framework is a great way to ensure your solution actually answers all the important needs of your customer. So thank you very much for listening. I very much look forward to seeing the innovations that you come up with and hopefully supporting one of the teams as a mentor. So thank you so much and very best of luck.